Billy and the Minpins by Roald Dahl. Being good. Little Billy's mother was always telling him exactly what he was allowed to do and what he was not allowed to do. All the things he was allowed to do were boring. All the things he was not allowed to do were exciting. One of the things he was never allowed to do, the most exciting of them all, was to go out through the garden gate all by himself and explore the world beyond. On this sunny summer afternoon, little Billy was kneeling on a chair in the living room, gazing out through the window at the wonderful world beyond. His mother was in the kitchen doing the ironing, and although the door was open, she couldn't see him. Every now and again his mother would call out to him, saying, "Little Billy, what are you up to in there?" And little Billy was always called back and say, "I'm being good, Mummy." But little Billy was awfully tired of being good. Through the window, not very far away, he could see the big black secret wood that was called the Forest of Sin. It was something he had always longed to explore. His mother had told him that even grown-ups were frightened of going into the Forest of Sin. She recited a poem to him that was well known in the district. It went like this: "Beware, beware, the Forest of Sin. None come out, but many go in." "Why don't they come out?" little Billy asked her. "What happens to them in the wood?" "That wood," his mother said, "is full of the most bloodthirsty wild beasts in the world." "You mean tigers and lions?" little Billy asked. "Much worse than that," his mother said. "What's worse than tigers and lions, Mummy?" "Whangdoodles and worse," his mother said, "and hornswogglers and snozwanglers and vermicious knids. And worst of all is the terrible blood-suckling, tooth-pluckling, stone-chuckling Spittler. There's one of them in there too." "A Spittler, Mummy?" "Of course, and when the Spittler chases after you, he blows clouds of hot smoke out of his nose." "Would he eat me up?" little Billy asked. "In one gulp," his mother said. Little Billy did not believe a word of this. He guessed his mother was making it all up just to frighten him and stop him ever going out of the house alone. And now little Billy was kneeling on the chair, gazing with longing through the window at the famous Forest of Sin. "Little Billy," his mother called out from the kitchen, "what are you doing?" "I'm being good, Mummy," little Billy called back. Just then a funny thing happened. Little Billy began to hear somebody whispering in his ear. He knew exactly who it was. It was the devil. The devil always started whispering to him when he was especially bored. "It would be easy," the devil was whispering, "to climb out through that window. No one would see you, and in a jiffy you would be in the garden, and in another jiffy you would be through the front gate, and in yet another jiffy you would be exploring the marvelous Forest of Sin all by yourself. It is a super place. Do not believe one word of what your mother says about whangdoodles and hornswogglers and snozwanglers and vermicious knids and the terrible blood-suckling, tooth-pluckling, stone-chuckling Spittler. There are no such things." "What is in there?" little Billy whispered. "Wild strawberries," the devil whispered back. "The whole floor of the forest is carpeted with wild strawberries, every one of them luscious and red and juicy ripe. Go and see for yourself." These were the words the devil whispered softly into little Billy's ear on that sunny summer afternoon. The next moment little Billy had opened the window and was climbing out. "Run, little Billy, run, run, run." In a jiffy, little Billy had dropped silently onto the flower bed below. In another jiffy, he was out through the garden gate, and in yet another jiffy, he was standing on the very edge of the great big dark Forest of Sin. He had made it. He had got there, and now the forest was all his to explore. Was he nervous? What? Who said anything about being nervous? Hornswogglers? Vermicious knids? What sort of rubbish was that? Little Billy hesitated. "I'm not nervous," he said. "I'm not in the least bit nervous, not me." Very, very slowly he walked into the great forest. Giant trees were soon surrounding him on all sides, and their branches made an almost solid roof high above his head, blotting out the sky. Here and there little shafts of sunlight shone through gaps in the roof. There was not a sound anywhere. It was like being among the dead men in an enormous empty green cathedral. When he had ventured some distance into the forest, little Billy stopped and stood quite still, listening. He could hear nothing, nothing at all. There was absolute silence. Or was there? Hold on just 1 second. What was that? Little Billy flicked his head round and stared into the everlasting gloom and doom of the forest. There it was again! There was no mistaking it this time. From far away there came a very faint wheezing, whiffling noise, like a small gusty wind blowing through the trees. Then it grew louder. Every second it was growing louder, and suddenly it was no longer a small wind. It was a fearsome, swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, snorting noise that sounded as though some gigantic creature was breathing heavily through its nose as it galloped towards him. Little Billy turned and ran. Little Billy ran faster than he had ever run in his life before, but the swishing, whooshing, whiffling, snorting noise was coming after him. Worse still, it was getting louder. This meant that the thing, the maker of the noise, the galloping creature, was getting closer. It was catching him up. Run, little Billy! Run, run, run! He dodged around massive trees, he skipped over roots and brambles, he bent low to flash under boughs and bushes. He had wings on his feet, he ran so fast, but still the fearsome swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, snorting noise grew louder and louder as it came closer and closer. Little Billy glanced back quickly over his shoulder, and now, in the distance, he saw a sight that froze his blood and made icicles in his veins. What he saw were two mighty puffs of orange-red smoke billowing and rolling through the trees in his direction. These were followed by two more, whoosh, whoosh, and then two more, whoosh, whoosh, and they must surely be coming, Little Billy told himself, from the two nose holes of some galloping, panting beast that had smelled him out and was coming after him. His mother's words began thrumming once again in his head. Beware, beware, the forest of sin. None come out, but many go in. It's the Spittler for sure, Little Billy cried out. Mummy said the Spittler blows smoke when it chases you. This one is blowing smoke. It's the terrible blood-suckling, tooth-pluckling, stone-chuckling Spittler. And soon it will catch me up, and I'll be blood-suckled and tooth-pluckled and stone-chuckled and chewed up into tiny pieces, and then the Spittler will spit me out in a cloud of smoke, and that will be the end of me.
Hi guys, I hope you're enjoying the audio ebook. I won't keep you for long. Last year I was demonetized by YouTube and so I lost all opportunity to earn. But I love sharing the audio ebooks with you so much, I carried on. If you value what I'm doing here, please consider heading over to my other channel, Book Club, and hitting that subscribe button as a sign of support. The link's in the description. Now, back to the book. Enjoy.
Whoomph, whoomph. Little Billy was running with the speed of an arrow, but each time he glanced back over his shoulder, the puffs of orange-red, smoky breath had got closer. They were so close now he could feel the wind of them on in the back of his neck. And the noise! It was deafening in his ears, this fearsome, swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, panting noise. Whoomph, whoomph, it went. Whoomph, 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 whoomph. It was like the noise made by a steam locomotive pulling out from a station. Then suddenly he heard another noise that was somehow more fearsome still. It was the pounding of gigantic galloping hooves on the floor of the forest. He glanced round again, but the thing, the beast, the monster, or whatever it was hiding from his sight by the smoke it shot out as it galloped forward. The smoky breath was billowing all around him now. He could feel its hotness. Worse still, he could smell its smell. The smell was disgusting. It was the stench that comes from deep inside the tummy of a meat-eating animal. "Mummy!" he cried out. "Save me!" Suddenly, directly in front of him, Little Billy saw the trunk of an enormous tree. This tree was different from the others because it had branches hanging down very low. While still running, he made a frantic jump for its lowest branch. He caught it and pulled himself up. Then he grabbed the next branch above his head and pulled himself up again, then again and again, climbing higher and higher to get away from the terrible, snorting, smoke-blowing, smelly-breathed beast down below. He stopped climbing only when he was too exhausted to climb any higher. He looked up, but even now he couldn't see the top of the giant tree. It seemed to go on forever. He looked down. He couldn't see the ground either. He was in a world of green leaves and thick, smooth branches, with no earth or sky in sight. The snorting, smelly, smoke-blowing beast was miles away down below somewhere. He couldn't even hear it any more. Little Billy found a comfortable place where two big branches came together, and he sat down to rest. For the moment, at any rate, he was safe. Then something very peculiar happened. There was a huge smooth branch very close to where little Billy was sitting, and he suddenly noticed that a small square patch of bark on this branch was beginning to move. It was a very small patch, about the size of a postage stamp, and the two sides of it seemed to be splitting down the middle and opening slowly outwards like a pair of shutters on some tiny window. Little Billy sat staring at this extraordinary thing, and all at once a strange uncomfortable feeling came over him. It felt as though the tree he was sitting in, and the green leaves all around him, belonged to another world altogether, and that he was a trespasser who had no right to be where he was. He watched intently as the tiny shutters of tree bark opened wider and wider, and when they were fully open, they revealed a small squarish window set neatly in the curve of the big branch. There was some sort of a yellowish glow coming from deep inside the window. "We are the Minpins." The very next thing little Billy saw was a tiny face at the window. It had appeared suddenly, from nowhere, and it was the face of an extremely old man with white hair. Little Billy could see this clearly, despite the fact that the whole of the tiny man's head was no larger than a pea. This ancient miniature face was staring straight at little Billy with a most severe expression on it. The skin of the face was deeply wrinkled all over, but the eyes were as bright as two stars. Now something even more peculiar began to happen. All around him, not only the huge main trunk of the tree, but also on all the big branches that grew out of it, other tiny windows were opening, and tiny faces were peering out. Some of these faces belonged to men, and others were clearly women. Here and there the head of a child was seen peering over a window sill. The heads of these children were no larger than the heads of matchsticks. In the end there must have been more than 20 small windows all around where little Billy was sitting, and from each window these amazing little faces were peering out. No sound came from any of the watchers. The faces were silent, unmoving, almost ghost-like. Now the tiny old man in the window nearest to Billy seemed to be saying something, but his voice was so soft and whispery, little Billy had to lean right up close to catch his words. "You're in a bit of a twizzler, aren't you?" the voice was saying. "You can't go down again, because if you do you'll be guzzled up at once, but you can't possibly sit up here forever either." I know," little Billy gasped. "Don't shout," the tiny man said. "I'm not shouting," little Billy said. "Talk softer," the tiny man said. "If you talk too loud your voice will blow me away." But who are you?" little Billy asked, taking care to speak very softly this time. "We are the Minpins," the tiny man said, "and we own this wood. I shall come closer, then you will hear me better." The old Minpin climbed out of his window and walked straight down the big steeply sloping branch, then up another branch until he found a place only a few inches from little Billy's face. It was amazing to see him walking up and down these almost vertical branches without the slightest trouble. It was like seeing someone walking up and down a wall. "How on earth do you do that?" little Billy asked. "Suction boots," the Minpin said. "We all wear them. You can't live in trees without suction boots." On his feet he was wearing tiny green boots, rather like miniature wellies. His clothes were curiously old-fashioned, mostly brown and black, the sort of thing people wore 200 or 300 years ago. Suddenly, all the other Minpins, men, women, and children, were climbing out of their windows and making their way towards little Billy. Their suction boots seemed to allow them to walk up and down the steepest branches with the greatest ease, and some were even walking upside down, underneath the branches. All of them were wearing these old-fashioned clothes from hundreds of years ago, and several had on very peculiar hats and bonnets. They stood or sat in groups on all the branches around little Billy, staring at him as though he were someone from outer space. "But do you actually live inside this tree?" little Billy asked. The old Minpin said, "All the trees in this forest are hollow, not just this one, but all of them, and inside them thousands and thousands of Minpins are living. These great trees are filled with rooms and staircases, not just in the big main trunk, but in most of the other branches as well. This is a Minpin forest, and it's not the only one in England." "Could I peep inside?" little Billy said. Of course," the old man said. "Put your eye close to that window." He pointed to the one he had just come out of. Little Billy shifted his position and placed one eye right up against the square hole that was no bigger than a postage stamp. What he now saw was quite marvellous. The Gruncher knows you're up here. Little Billy saw a room that was lit by a pale yellow light of some sort, and it was furnished with beautifully made miniature chairs and a table. To one side was a four-poster bed. It was like one of the rooms Little Billy had once seen in the Queen's doll's house at Windsor Castle. "It's beautiful," Little Billy said. "Are they all as lovely as this one?" "Most are smaller," the old Minpin said. "This one is very grand, because I am the ruler of this tree. My name is Don Minnie. What is yours?" "Mine is Little Billy," Little Billy said. "Greetings, Little Billy," Don Minnie said. "You are welcome to look into some of the other rooms if you wish. We are very proud of them." All the other Minpin families wanted to show Little Billy their own rooms. They rushed about along the branches calling out, "Come and see mine! Please come and see mine!" Little Billy began climbing about and peeping into the tiny windows. Through one window he saw a bathroom just like his own at home, only 1,000 times smaller. And through another he saw a classroom with lots of tiny desks and a blackboard at one end. In every room there was a stairway in one corner leading up to the room above. As Little Billy went from window to window, the Minpins followed him, clustering round and smiling at his exclamations of wonder. "They're absolutely marvellous," he said. "They're much nicer than our rooms at home." When the sightseeing tour was over, Little Billy sat down again on a large branch and said to the whole company of Minpins, "Look, I've had a lovely time with you all, but how am I ever going to get home again? My mother will be going crazy." "You can never get down from this tree," Don Minnie said. "I've told you that. If you're stupid enough to try, you'll be eaten up in 5 seconds. "Is it the Spittler?" Little Billy asked. "Is it the terrible, blood-suckling, tooth-pluckling, stone-chuckling Spittler?" "I've never heard of any Spittler," Don Minnie said. "The one waiting for you down there is the fearsome Gruncher, the red-hot smoke-belching Gruncher. He grunches up everything in the forest. That's why we have to live up here. He has grunched up hundreds of humans and literally millions of Minpins. What makes him so dangerous is his amazing magical nose. His nose can smell out a human or Minpin or any other animal from 10 miles away. Then he gallops towards it at terrific speed. He can never see anything in front of him because all the smoke he belches out from his nose and mouth. But that doesn't bother him. His nose tells him exactly where to go." "Why does he blow out all that smoke?" Little Billy asked. "Because he's got a red-hot fire in his belly," Don Minnie said. "The Gruncher likes his meat roasted, and the fire roasts it as it goes down." "Look," said Little Billy, "Gruncher or no Gruncher, I've simply got to get home somehow. I'll have to make a dash for it." "Don't try it, I beg you," Don Minnie said. "The Gruncher knows you're up here. He's down there now, waiting for you. Climb down a bit lower with me, and I'll show you." We know all the birds. Don Minnie walked easily straight down the side of the great tree trunk. Little Billy climbed carefully after him from one branch to the next. Soon, below them, they began to smell the revolting hot stench of the Gruncher's breath, and the orange-red smoke was now billowing up into the lower branches in thick clouds. "What does he look like?" Little Billy whispered. "Nobody knows," Don Minnie answered. "He makes so much steam and smoke you can never see him. If you are behind him, you can sometimes catch a glimpse of little bits of him because all the smoke is being blown out in the front. Some Minpins say they have seen his back legs, huge and black and very hairy, shaped like lions' legs, but 10 times as big. And it is rumoured that his head is like an enormous crocodile's head, with rows and rows and rows of sharp-pointed teeth. But nobody really knows. Mind you, he must have gigantic nose holes to be able to blow out all that smoke." They stayed still, listening, and they could hear the Gruncher pawing the ground at the base of the tree with his giant hooves and snorting with greed. "He smells you," Don Minnie said. "He knows you aren't far away. He'll wait forever to get you now. He adores humans, and he doesn't catch them very often. Humans are like strawberries and cream to him. You see, for months he's been living on a diet of Minpins, and 1,000 Minpins is not even a snack for him. The brute is ravenous." Little Billy and Don Minnie climbed back up the tree to where all the other Minpins were gathered. They seemed glad to see Little Billy come back safely. "Stay up here with us," they said to him. "We'll look after you." Just then a lovely blue swallow alighted on a branch not far away, and Little Billy saw a mother Minpin and her 2 children climb quite casually onto the swallow's back. Then the swallow took off and flew away with its passengers seated comfortably between its wings. "Good heavens!" cried little Billy. "Is that a special tame bird?" "Not at all," Don Minnie said. "We know all the birds. The birds are our friends. We use them all the time for going places. That lady is taking her children to see their grandmother, who lives in another forest about 50 miles away. They'll be there in less than an hour." "Can you talk to them?" little Billy asked. "To the birds, I mean." "Of course we can talk to them," Don Minnie said. "We can summon them any time we want if we have to go somewhere. How else would we get our supplies of food up here? The red-hot gruncher makes it impossible for us to walk anywhere in the wood." "Do the birds like doing this for you?" little Billy asked. "They'll do anything for us," Don Minnie said. "They love us, and we love them. We store food for them inside the trees, so they don't starve when the icy cold winter comes along." Suddenly all sorts of birds were alighting on the branches of the tree around where little Billy was sitting, and the Minpins were climbing onto their backs in droves. Most of the Minpins had small sacks slung over their shoulders. "At this time of day they go off to collect food," Don Minnie said. "All the grown-ups have to help in getting food for the community. The population of each tree looks after itself. Our large trees are like your cities and towns, and the small trees are like your villages." It was an astonishing sight. Every kind of wonderful bird was flying in and perching on the branches of the great tree, and as soon as one landed, a Minpin would climb onto its back, and off they would go. There were blackbirds and thrushes and skylarks and ravens and starlings and jays and magpies and many kinds of small finches. It was all very fast and well organized. Each bird seemed to know exactly which Minpin it was collecting, and each Minpin knew exactly which bird he or she had ordered for the morning. "The birds are our cars," Don Minnie said to little Billy. "They are much nicer and they never crash." Soon all the grown-up Minpins, excepting Don Minnie, had flown away on birds, and only the tiny children were left. Then the robins came in, and the children began climbing onto their backs and going for short flights. Don Minnie said to little Billy, "The children all practice learning to fly on robins. Robins are sensible and careful birds, and they love the little ones." Little Billy stood there staring. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. "Call up the swan." While the children were practicing on the robins, little Billy said to Don Minnie, "Is there no way in the world to get rid of that disgusting red-hot smoke-belching gruncher down there?" "The only time a gruncher dies," Don Minnie said, "is if he falls into deep water. The water puts out the fire inside him, and then he's dead. The fire to a gruncher is like your heart is to you. Stop your heart and you die at once. Put out the fire and the gruncher dies in 5 seconds. That's the only way to kill a gruncher." "Now hang on a minute," little Billy said. "Is there by any chance a pond or something around here?" "There's a big lake on the far side of the forest," Don Minnie said. "But who's going to entice the gruncher into that? Not us, and certainly not you. He'd be on you before you got within 10 yards of him." "But you did say the gruncher can't see in front of him because of all the clouds of smoke he blows," little Billy said. "Quite true," Don Minnie said. "But how is that going to help us? I don't think the gruncher is ever going to fall into the lake. He never goes out of the forest." "I think I know how to make him fall in," little Billy said. "What I want," little Billy went on, "is a bird that is big enough to carry me." Don Minnie thought about this for a while. Then he said, "You're a very small boy, and because of that, I think a swan could carry you quite easily." "Call up a swan," little Billy said. Suddenly there was a new authority in his voice. But I hope you're not going to do anything dangerous," Don Minnie cried. "Listen carefully," little Billy said, "because you must tell the swan exactly what he has to do. With me on his back, he must fly down to the gruncher. The gruncher will smell me and know that I am very close, but he won't see me through all the steam and the smoke. He'll go mad trying to get at me. The swan will tantalize him by flying back and forth right in front of him. Is that possible?" "Quite possible," Don Minnie said, "except that you might easily fall off. You've had no flying practice at all." "I'll hang on somehow," little Billy said. "Then the swan, keeping very low, will fly off through the forest with the ravenous gruncher hotfoot in pursuit. The swan will keep just ahead of the gruncher all the time, driving him crazy with my smell, and in the end the swan will fly straight over the big deep lake, and the gruncher, now travelling at a terrific speed, will follow right behind. Presto, he's in the lake." "My boy," Don Minnie cried, "you're a genius. Will you do it?" "Call up the swan," little Billy ordered. Don Minnie turned to one of the robins which had just come back from a practice flight with a child Minpin on its back. Little Billy heard him talking to the robin in a kind of curious twitter. He couldn't understand a word of it. The robin nodded its head and flew off. 2 minutes later, a truly magnificent swan, as white as snow, came swooping in and landed on a branch nearby. Don Minnie walked over to it, and once again a curious twittery conversation took place, a much longer one this time, with Don Minnie doing nearly all the twittering and the swan nodding and nodding. Then Don Minnie turned to little Billy and said, "Swan thinks it's a great idea. He says he can do it, but he's just a bit anxious because you have never flown before. He says you must hang on very tight to his feathers." "Don't you worry about that," little Billy said. "I'll hang on somehow. I don't want to be roasted alive and eaten by the gruncher." Little Billy climbed onto the swan's back. Many of the Minpins who had flown away a short while before were now returning on their birds. Their tiny sacks were bulging. They stood around on the branches, staring in wonder at the sight of this small human preparing to take off on a swan. "Goodbye, little Billy," they called out. "Good luck, good luck." And with that, the great swan spread his wings and glided gently downward through the many branches of the big tree. Little Billy hung on tight. Little Billy hung on tight. Oh, it was thrilling to be flying on the back of this great swan. It was wonderful to be up in the air and to feel the air swishing past his face. He hung on very tightly to Swan's feathers. And suddenly there it was just below them, the huge billow of orange-red smoke and steam coming from the nostrils of the awesome gruncher. The smoke enveloped the beast completely, and yet through the smoke, as they got very close, little Billy could just make out the enormous black shadow of some hairy monster. The snorting grew louder, and as the brute got more and more excited by the nearness of the delicious little Billy smell, the smoke began coming out faster and faster. Whoomph, 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 whoomph. Little Billy could feel the monster getting close. Whoomph, 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 whoomph. Swan was flying back and forth right in front of the snorting cloud of smoke, tempting and tantalizing the beast and driving him mad with greed. The beast, or rather the cloud of smoke, kept lunging at little Billy, but Swan was too quick for him and jinked away every time. The snorting grew louder and more ferocious every second, and the whoomph whoomph of thick hot steam came pouring out, thicker than ever. Once Swan looked round to see if little Billy was all right. Little Billy nodded and smiled, and he could swear Swan nodded and smiled back at him. At last, Swan must have decided they had done enough teasing. The great thick orange-red cloud was leaping up and down in a frenzy of hunger and desire, and the whole forest was echoing with the snorts and growls of the awesome creature. Swan glided round and headed in a straight line towards the edge of the forest, and of course the vast cloud of smoke came hurtling after him. Swan was very careful to fly low all the time, keeping just in front of the gruncher, leading him on and on, threading a path carefully through the great trees in the forest. The scent of human food was very strong in the gruncher's nostrils, and he must have been thinking that so long as he kept going flat out, he would catch his meal in the end. Suddenly, right in front of them, on the edge of the forest, was the lake. The gruncher, hurtling along right behind them, was interested only in the glorious human scent he was following. Swan flew straight towards the lake. He skimmed low over the water. The gruncher kept going. Little Billy, looking back, saw the gruncher plunging right into the lake, and then the whole lake seemed to erupt in a mass of boiling, steaming, frothing, bubbling water. For a brief moment the terrible red-hot smoke-belching gruncher made the lake boil and smoke like a volcano. Then the fire went out, and the awesome beast disappeared under the waves.
Hi guys, I hope you're enjoying the audio ebook. I won't keep you for long. If you value what I'm doing here, please consider heading over to my other channel, Book Club, and hitting that subscribe button as a sign of support. The link's in the description. Now, back to the book. Enjoy.
Hooray for little Billy! When it was all over, Swan and little Billy flew higher and circled the lake for a last look. And suddenly the whole sky around them was filled with birds, and every bird had one or more Minpins on its back. Little Billy recognized Don Minnie riding on a fine jay, and he was waving and cheering as he flew alongside them. It seemed that all the other Minpins from the big tree had turned up as well to witness the great victory over the dreaded gruncher. Every kind of bird was circling around Little Billy and Swan, and the Minpins on their backs were waving and clapping and shouting with joy. Little Billy waved back and laughed and thought how wonderful it all was. Then, led by Swan, all the birds and the Minpins returned to the home tree. Back in the tree there was a tremendous celebration for Little Billy's victory over the dreaded Gruncher. Minpins from all over the forest had flown in on their birds to cheer the young hero, and all the branches and twigs of the great tree were crowded with tiny people. When the cheers and the clapping had died down at last, Don Minnie stood up to make a speech. "Minpins of the forest," he cried, raising his small voice so that it could be heard all over the tree. "The murderous Gruncher, who has gobbled up so many thousands of us Minpins, has gone forever. The forest floor is safe at last for us to walk on, so now we can all go down to pick blackberries and winkleberries and puckleberries and muckleberries and twinkleberries and snozberries to our heart's content. And our children can play among the wild flowers and the roots all day long." Don Minnie paused and turned his eyes upon Little Billy, who was sitting on a branch not far away. "But, ladies and gentlemen," he went on, "who is it we have to thank for this great blessing that has come upon us? Who is the saviour of the Minpins?" Don Minnie paused again. The Minpins in their thousands sat listening intently. "Our saviour," he cried out, "our hero, our wonder boy is, as you already know, our human visitor, Little Billy." Cheers and shouts of "Hooray for Little Billy" from the crowd. Don Minnie now turned and spoke directly to Little Billy. "You, my boy, have done a wonderful thing for us, and in return we wish to do something for you. I have had a word with Swan, and he has agreed to become your personal private aeroplane for just as long as you remain small enough to fly on his back." More cheers and clapping and shouts of "Good old Swan! What a great idea!" "However," Don Minnie continued, still addressing Little Billy, "you cannot go flying around all over the place on Swan's back in full daylight. Some human would be bound to see you, and then the secret would be out, and you would be forced to tell your people all about us. That must never happen. If it did, crowds of enormous humans would come clumping all over our beloved forest to look for Minpins, and our quiet homeland would be ruined." "I'll never tell a soul," Little Billy cried out. "Even so," Don Minnie said, "we cannot risk you making daylight flights, but every night, after the light in your bedroom has been switched off, Swan will come to your window to see if you'd like a ride. Sometimes he will bring you back here to see us. Other times he will take you to visit places more wonderful than you could ever dream of. Would you like Swan to take you home now? I think we can risk just one more quick daylight flight." "Oh gosh!" Little Billy cried. "I'd clean forgotten about home. Mummy will be in a panic. I must fly." Don Minnie gave the signal, and in 5 seconds Swan swooped down and landed on the tree. Little Billy climbed onto his back, and as the great Swan spread his wings and flew away, the whole forest, not just the tree they were in, but the whole forest from end to end, came alive with the cheering of 1,000,000 Minpins. "I will never forget you." Swan landed on the lawn of Little Billy's house, and Little Billy jumped off his back and ran to the living room window. Very quietly he climbed in. The room was empty. "Little Billy," came his mother's voice from the kitchen. "What are you up to in there? You've been very quiet for a long time." "I'm being good, Mummy," Little Billy called back. "I'm being very, very good." His mother came into the room with a pile of ironing in her arms. She looked at Little Billy. "What have you been doing?" she cried. "Your clothes are absolutely filthy." "I've been climbing trees," Little Billy said. "I can't let you out of my sight for 10 minutes, his mother said. "Which tree was it?" "Just one of those old trees outside," Little Billy said. "If you're not careful, you'll fall down and break an arm," his mother said. "Don't do it again." "I won't," Little Billy said, smiling a little. "I'll just fly up into the branches on silver wings." "What rubbish you talk," his mother said, and she walked out of the room with her ironing. From then on, Swan came every night to Little Billy's bedroom window. He came after Billy's mother and father had gone to sleep, and the whole house was quiet. But Little Billy was never asleep. He was always wide awake and eagerly waiting. And every night, before Swan arrived, he saw to it that the curtains were drawn back and the window was opened wide, so that the great white bird could come gliding right into the room and land on the floor beside his bed. Then little Billy would slip into his dressing gown and climb onto the swan's back, and off they would go. Oh, it was a wondrous secret life that little Billy lived up there in the sky at night on Swan's back. They flew in a magical world of silence, swooping and gliding over the dark world below where all the earthly people were fast asleep in their beds. Once Swan flew higher than ever before, and they came to an enormous billowing cloud that was shining in a pale golden light, and in the folds of this cloud little Billy could make out creatures of some sort moving around. Who were they? He wanted so badly to ask Swan this question, but he couldn't speak a word of bird language. Swan seemed unwilling to fly very close to these creatures from another world, and this made it impossible for little Billy to see them clearly. Another time Swan flew through the night for what seemed like hours and hours, until they came at last to a gigantic opening in the earth's surface, a sort of huge gaping hole in the ground, and Swan glided slowly round and round above this massive crater, and then right down into it. Deeper and deeper they went into the dark hole. Suddenly there was a brightness like sunlight below them, and little Billy could see a vast lake of water, gloriously blue, and on the surface of the lake thousands of swans were swimming slowly about. The pure white of the swans against the blue of the water was very beautiful. Little Billy wondered whether this was a secret meeting place of all the swans of the world, and he wished he had been able to ask Swan this question as well. But sometimes mysteries are more intriguing than explanations, and the swans on the blue lake, like the creatures on the golden cloud, would remain a mystery forever in little Billy's memory. About once a week, Swan would fly little Billy back to the old tree in the forest to visit the Minpins. On one of these visits, Don Minnie said to him, "You are growing up fast, little Billy. I'm afraid that soon you will be too heavy for Swan." "I know," little Billy said. "I can't help it." "I'm afraid we don't have any bigger birds than Swan," Don Minnie said. "But when he can't carry you any longer, I do hope you will still come up here to visit us." I will," little Billy cried. "I will always keep coming to see you. I will never forget you." "And listen," Don Minnie said, smiling. "Perhaps some of us might come down in great secrecy to visit you." "Could you really do that?" little Billy asked. "I think we might," Don Minnie said. "We could trickle silently down to your house in the dark and creep into your bedroom for a midnight feast." "But how would you get all the way up to my bedroom window?" little Billy asked. "Have you forgotten our suction boots?" Don Minnie said. "We'd simply walk straight up the wall of your house." "How lovely!" little Billy cried. "Then we can take it in turns visiting each other." "Of course we can," Don Minnie said. And that is exactly what happened. No child has ever had such an exciting young life as little Billy, and no child has ever kept such a huge secret so faithfully. He never told a soul about the Minpins. I myself have been very careful not to tell you where they live, and I am not about to tell you now. But if by some extraordinary chance you should one day wander into a forest and catch a glimpse of a Minpin, then hold your breath and thank your lucky stars, because up to now, so far as I know, no one excepting little Billy has ever seen one. Watch the birds as they fly above your heads, and, who knows, you might well spy a tiny creature riding on the back of a swallow or a raven. Watch the robin especially, because it always flies low, and you might see a nervous young minpin perched on the feathers having its first flying lesson. And above all, watch with glittering eyes the whole world around you, because the greatest secrets are always hidden in the most unlikely places. Those who don't believe in magic will never find it. The end.
Last year I was demonetized by YouTube, and so I lost all opportunity to earn. But I love sharing the audio ebooks with you so much, I carried on. If you value what I'm doing here, please consider heading over to my other channel, Book Club, and hitting that subscribe button as a sign of support. The link's in the description.